Good day everybody. Myself Denzil Celestine Dcosta, HOD of BSc in Hospitality Science at Milagros College. Today we'll be speaking on the topic breads. What is a bread? Bread is basically a paste of flour and water cooked over or surrounded by heat. Okay, so this is the basic explanation of bread. Now, when we go technically, thus bread is a food made from flour or meal mixed with other dry and liquid ingredients, usually combined with leavening agents and kneaded, shaped into loaves and baked. So here, to a bread, leavening agents are added. What do you mean by leavening agents? Leavening agents are agents which help in bulking of bread. It can be natural ingredients or it can be chemical ingredients which help in the leavening of bread. In the ancient days, they used to use the natural leavening agents. They used to allow the bread to ferment and then form its own leavening. Nowadays, they add third-party leavening agents such as baking powder, baking soda and other agents. Also, yeast, a naturally grown fungus, is used as a leavening agent. So let's speak about the history of breads. When did the breads start or come into existence? Breads came into existence around 8000 BC in the Middle East and in the Egypt. In the Middle Eastern or in let's say in Egypt, the breads were made with round shaped flat breads as we have in India, that is called as the chapati or tortillas in Mexico. They used a simple machine called as the quern. A quern, as you can see in the picture over there, as you can see this picture, okay, they used to knead the grains to form flour, and this flour was mixed with liquids, especially liquids like water or any other third-party liquids, and then this bread was baked. What are the different methods of making a bread dough? Let's go through that. There are basically 5 different methods of making a bread dough. They are straight dough method, no time dough method, delayed salt dough method, sponge and dough method. The last one is ferment and dough method. Now, we'll see the first method, that is the straight dough method. What do you mean by straight dough method? In this method, all the ingredients are mixed together and the dough is fermented for the predetermined time. The fermentation time depends on the strength of the flour. Strong flour requires longer fermentation time to mature adequately. Flour which requires 2 to 3 hours of maturation should be used for making breads by straight dough. What happens here is the flour that is there, you have to use the gluten in this flour should be very strong. Okay, and here it is done at a stretch, at a single process. There is no different processes breaking through. Okay, flours that take very long for maturation should not be used for straight dough method, because during this prolonged fermentation it is difficult to control the temperature of the dough, because for the yeast or for the natural leavening agents to work, there needs a limited quantity of heat, because any living organisms to grow needs heat. So to control this, the heat, if it is kept for a longer time, cannot be controlled. There's a chance this leavening can go off. So only strong flours can be used over here. Rise of temperature causes acidic taste, because yes, when the temperature rises, the yeast or any fungus or any leavening agents changes its chemical properties and it forms acidic. Okay, and flavor of the bread also changes. That is the straight dough method. Next, we will go to no time dough method. So let's see what is this no time dough method. This is a method where fermentation is usual manner. It is done in a very usual manner, the normal method. Okay, it is allowed to ferment for a very short period of time. So the twin functions, that is the fermentation, that is production of gases, and conditioning of the gluten, because these are the two main aspects that go on while a dough is maturing. That is, first one is the production of gases, and second one is condition of gluten, are achieved to some extent by increasing the amount of yeast. In this method, no time dough method, it's very short time. In this very short time, if the bread should attain its leavening, what is to be done? You need to add more leavening agents. That is, the leavening agent that we are going to use here is yeast. Okay, yeast being a natural leavening agent, when you use less quantity, the leavening will not be attained. Only when larger quantity is added, the leavening will be attained. Due to a short fermentation time, the gluten and the starch are not conditioned to hold moisture. Remember, because of this very short time, the gluten doesn't have that elasticity to hold the moisture within it, and there is no flavor. It is flavorless because maturation of flavor doesn't take place. Okay, and the what you can tell as fermentation, the long fermentation time is absent. As there is increased quality of yeast present, the bread will have the flavor or strong flavor of yeast present in it. Next, we go to the delayed salt dough method. Now, what is this delayed salt dough method? Why is that word salt and delayed used here? Okay, it is a slight variation of the straight dough method. Yes, it is almost similar to the straight dough method, but here another aspect, another content which is used in large quantity is the salt. Okay, the salt is added to control the shape of dough. As we can see in the picture, there are different shapes of bread. You can see here, there are different shapes of bread wherein the shape is controlled because of the salt. Why is that? Okay, what does salt do and when is this salt added? We'll go through it. Salt has a controlling action on the yeast function. As you know, yeast only works when carbohydrate, that is sugar, present in the dough. Now, when you have to control that or curtail that, when salt is added, what does it happen? It doesn't allow the yeast to grow, or the yeast becomes inactive or dies. Okay, thus control the shape, because if yeast is there, when the baking process is going on, the dough will keep on rising to attain a bigger shape. But when salt is added, the shape that we have given it to the dough will retain, will not lose its shape. Okay. Now, the salt is added at the knockback stage. What is the knockback stage? Knockback stage is a stage wherein the air, the first fermented air is removed out, and then you add in salt and knead it. So the yeast growth is curtailed, is stopped. Okay. Only 3/4 of the mixture is done using this method, and 1/4 is done after the salt is added. First 3/4 is completed, and then the 1/4 method is done after the salt is added. So it is added at the last time so that the bread doesn't become too hard. There is enough of growth of yeast, but the yeast is not allowed to grow. Okay, this method is suitable for strong flavor, and straight dough methods is used. Next one is sponge and dough method. What do you mean by sponge and dough method? This method is normally used for strong flours. Sponge dough are prepared in 2 stages. Remember, 2 stages. This procedure gives yeast action a head start. Okay, this gives a head start so that the yeast ferments in advance, and then it can be added into the main dough that is being prepared. Now, how is this done? The first stage is called as a sponge method. A yeast starter or a yeast fermenter is added to a part of the flour, a part of the liquid, and the full amount of yeast is added to that, and the flour is allowed to what you can tell as develop the yeast in the minimum quantity. Yes, it will be a little liquidy quantity, but once this flour is developed, it is added to the main quantity, so that what will happen here? The activated yeast will speed up the bread making process. Okay, let's go. Mixing operations are carried out to incorporate all the ingredients evenly. Now, once this is added into the main thing, it is evenly mixed up. The sponge is fermented for a predetermined time, which on the quality of flour and the amount of flour of the sponge. Next, we go to a process or a method called as ferment and dough method. Now, what is this method and why is this method different? Ferment and dough method is somewhat similar to sponge dough method, but here the difference is the richer dough or the richer ingredients that are being used. Let's go through it. This variation of sponge and dough method, rich dough which contains milk, eggs, sustainable amount of fat and sugar, have a retarding effect on yeast activity. Okay, that is why the fermentation takes place. These items doesn't allow the yeast to work much, but when the fermentation process goes on or when these items are allowed to ferment, there is aeration that takes place and the growth of yeast takes place. Yeast, food and sufficient water is mixing together. The yeast gets initially an environment which is conducive for vigorous activity. Initially, when there is sugar in it, the yeast works very hard and then it reduces its power, and then it is in a fit condition to take on the extra load of fermentation. Now, yeast, once the sugar is attained, it starts working with the other substances, that is milk, fat, sugar, all these it starts working and ferments those to produce the final product. Okay, when the fermented is ready, it is mixed into the dough along with the remaining ingredients and allowed to ferment. This method is used to make enriched breads, buns, garnished pastries. For example, as you see in the picture, donuts are depicted. Okay, so here we come to an end of the 5 most important stages of the dough making. Just to review, bread is basically a flour which is mixed with water and then it is allowed to come in contact with heat and then it bakes. Basically, a kiln is used to make the flour in the ancient days, and these are the 5 most important or 5 methods of making a dough, that is straight dough method, no time dough method, delayed salt dough method, sponge and dough method, ferment and dough method. Thank you one and all.